Welcome to this week's Walk Through Voices from Walk Through the Bible, where we are reading together through the daily Walk Bible reading schedule. This week we are finishing the Gospel of John and then reading about the first half of the book of Acts. You know, I think a lot of us are fascinated by the Acts of the Apostles. We love to read these stories. They're fascinating stories to us, aren't they? To read about this fast and expansive growth of the church, where thousands of people were coming to faith in Jesus on a single day. To read about the leadership and the management of this church as it was being formed and expanding rapidly. To read these stories of this Spirit-fueled spread of the gospel as it grew out of Jerusalem into Samaria and the ends of the earth, and to read about this bold and courageous faith that the early church leaders had as they were standing up in front of angry crowds and just boldly proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ. We love to read these stories, and I think we have a tendency as we read the stories in the book of Acts to go, yeah, we want to experience that. We want that in our life. But have you ever really stopped to consider how dramatically different your life would be if our lives read like the story of the book of Acts? I mean, in Acts 2, they were all gathered together. And if somebody had a need, people would just sell their property to give them the resources to meet a need. To experience persecution with gladness, because it would be used for the advancement of the gospel. The boldness to stand up in front of an angry crowd and to tell the story of God's redemptive work. Imagine if those were the kinds of things that marked our lives, or that our lives were about. If we truly lived our lives like the stories that we read in this book of Acts, our lives might look pretty different and pretty dramatic. And quite honestly, for a lot of us, I think it would be a little scary. The book of Acts does read different than most of our lives. It certainly reads different than my life. I think words like bold and fearless and expectant can be used to describe the stories in the book of Acts. And I look at my life and I use words like safe, measured, comfortable. That'd be your experience as well. And it leaves me wondering why. Why is it that the stories that we read in the book of Acts are often so very different than the stories that you and I might be living today? Well, in part, I think we can answer that question because of the uniqueness of the period of time in God's story, the expansion and the validation of the gospel as it was advancing out following the resurrection and the ascension of Jesus. It was a unique time and a unique period, and that certainly is true. But I've been thinking about that question a lot as I've been reading the book of Acts with you this week. Why? Why is it that the stories in Acts are so different than the stories of my life and maybe your life as well? And there's a word that just kind of got stuck in my head, and there's a word that I can't seem to escape as I think about the difference between what I read here and what I see here. And that word is urgency. When I read these stories in the book of Acts, and I've been reading them again this week, there was just an urgency to how they lived. An urgency to meet needs, an urgency to spread the gospel, an urgency to sacrifice anything so that the good news of Jesus Christ could be known around the world. There was an urgency to how they lived. And I don't know that I've got that. And I've been praying a prayer this week, and I would actually encourage you to pray it with me. It's one of those dangerous prayers that if we're not careful can change our life pretty drastically. But I've been praying that God would give me a sense of urgency. An urgency to how I live, an urgency to the desire to see the gospel of Jesus Christ spread in my life and around the world. And I just would encourage you, as you read the book of Acts this week, I hope you're inspired. I hope you just are inspired by what you read. But more than just being inspired, I hope that you feel called to step with a greater sense of urgency into your life for the advancement of the gospel here and around the world. And that gap between what we read here and what most of us experience would begin to get smaller and smaller and smaller in our lives now and in the future.